Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with the End Time Ministries, and I want to welcome you to Thursday's edition of End of the Age. Now, before I get into my program today, I'm going to be talking about the mark of the beast, Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18. But I want to announce a lot of you guys listen to us on the radio, guys and gals, and you're driving in your truck or you're going to a job site or you're picking up your kids for school, whatever. And a lot of you don't understand or know that we're on television as well. We're on the Daystar Network, TBN, a lot of different religious networks with a television program several times a week called End of the Age. Furthermore, a lot of you guys just listening to us on the radio don't realize that you can go to endtime.com and watch these programs live from 3 to 4 Central Time, or follow us. You can go back and watch archived programs at endtime.com and watch these live. Sometimes Irvin, myself, we might stand up in front of a screen and go over maps, do all kinds of different things. So there's several ways to get the End of the Age program. And so if you'd like to watch one of these live, if you're just in a place where you can't watch live, you're driving, you can go in the evening and watch the archived program and actually see us do a live program. Many of y'all that are just listening to us on a radio station can only get the first 30 minutes of the program. Well, the program's actually an hour long, and you can get the full hour if you go to endtime.com and watch it there. So I just wanted to announce that, because if you're only getting the first 30 minutes of the program, man, you're missing a lot of stuff in that last 30 minutes. A lot of times we take a lot of callers, a lot of stuff, a lot of the meat of what we talk about. We try to give it in both segments, but man, it's impossible to do it all in 30 minutes to really cover a subject that's going on in the news. So we can hit the treetops, but to really get down into it, it's hard to drill down something in 30 minutes. So if you want to join us for a full hour, go to endtime.com, watch the whole program. I wanted to announce that before you guys cut off at the bottom of the hour. Now, many of you will understand the prophecy of the mark of the beast. It's Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. Revelation chapter 13 covers the one world government, the one world religion going to be established in the end time, and the one world economic system that will be used by the Antichrist in his one world governing system to cause everyone on earth, those that are not resisting him, to bow down to his edicts. He will economically sanction you, just like the United Nations and the international community economically sanctions nations right now. It's on a national level, like they're sanctioning Iran to keep them from producing a nuclear weapon, economic sanctions. Well, eventually that will come down to an individual level where they will try to economically sanction you and I to get us to bow down to the edicts of the one world government. So what the Antichrist is going to use, it's going to be his economic sanctioning system. It's called the mark of the beast. Everybody will be given their own unique number in their right hand or in their forehead somehow or another. And without that, you won't be able to buy or sell. So we have a lot of people calling all the time and say, how do you guys even know we're in the end time? Their ministry's called End Time Ministries. There's no way to prove that we're in the end time. All of this stuff could happen light years away. Well, there are many ways. I've got a plethora of ways that I could prove we're in the end time. Ongoing fulfillment of prophecy written in the Bible 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. We use current events here to prove that we're in the end time. One of those prophecies is the mark of the beast. Up until when the prophecy was written 2,000 years ago by John on the Isle of Patmos in the book of Revelation, up until just a few decades ago, it was never possible. Until the invention of the computer, some of these other different things that they have, ways of implementing a global numbering system, it was never possible up until the last few decades. But now, they've got ways of implementing it worldwide, and there are people trying to do that. And the way they're trying to do it is to establish a national ID system in every nation on earth. Almost every nation, as we speak, has a compulsory national ID card fully implemented in that country. And they're getting to the point now where they're requiring that national ID card, for you to have the national ID card for just basic things, basic necessities in life. A lot of the poorer countries, the underdeveloped countries around the world, they're forcing this ID, the national ID number on these individuals to even get their food. A lot of them come to the government for food on a daily basis. And they want to implement this system so bad that they're saying, you've got to have this national ID system or no benefits from the government. No food, no health care, no job, you can't travel, you can't function in society unless you have this national ID card. This is going on in most of the nations around the world as we speak. So, in the latter part of the program, I'm going to talk to you and give you an update on the real ID, which is the national ID card they're trying to implement here in the United States. Many of you have seen signs and different things in airports cropping up where they're saying, hey, in 2018, this is going to happen. 2020, this is going to happen. Well, I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. But I wanted to start off the program just to give you an idea of how far it can go. Now, in North Korea, at this point today, 2017, it's so bad that many times if you're caught without your national ID card, I mean, it's like Papers, Please, Nazi Germany all over again. If you're caught without your national ID card, you spend time in a work camp for several weeks. And days or weeks at a time. And so consequently, it's mandatory. You have that national ID card or you do not function in society, North Korea. In other countries, which is what I'm going to talk about now, this one is in India. India is trying to they're implementing the largest national ID system on earth. You realize India has one of the largest populations on earth, India, China, and they're implementing a national ID system as we speak. So the Guardian reports this. The title of the article is No ID, no national ID, no benefits, and that thousands could lose their lifeline under India's biometric scheme. So let's talk about it. The controversial Aadhaar card, their national ID system, their national ID card, it restricts fundamental rights, and which is argued by critics in India, limiting access to free school meals and exposing up to 1 billion people to privacy risks. Hundreds of thousands of people in India could be left without essential government services and benefits, including free school meals and uniforms, food subsidies. Now that's the big one. Food subsidies. Many of these people go to the government entities for food on a daily basis, and they're saying, you don't have the national ID card, they'll cut off the food supply. Imagine. And pensions in the country, and under the new rules that make access to more than 36 state-funded schemes conditional on simply showing a national ID. Over the past month, citizens have been notified that they have to prove their identity with a biometric ID known as the Aadhaar card, their national ID system, to be eligible to use various services, such as booking railway tickets online, applying for jobs, getting fuel subsidies. Well, it's all dependent on showing the national ID card in India. The Aadhaar cards were introduced by the Indian government back in 2009. So this stuff didn't start a month ago. They've been doing this for several years now around the world. Do your research. You'll see most nations on earth are already fully functioning under a national ID system. So it started in 2009 and it was rolled out by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014. They record personal biometric data, including fingerprints and eye scans. Now remember, the Bible says, let's compare this to what the scriptures say. Revelation 13 said that the Antichrist is going to give everybody their own unique identification number in their right hand or in their forehead. Your fingerprints are in your hand and your eyes are in your forehead. So this database that they're collecting, all these biometric data, includes fingerprints and eye scans, which the government says allows it to ensure that welfare services are being delivered to those specific individuals who really need them. And they're saving billions of rupees, the money in India, by reducing welfare fraud as a result. The Unique Identification Authority of India, the one that the UIDAI, which is over this national ID program, which it oversees the Aadhaar program, says that already more than 1.13 billion people have been enrolled in the official database. That's almost, think of it, that's almost 1/5, just in India, 1/5 of the world's population. They've already been given a national ID card just in India. But activists say that hundreds of thousands of Indians and migrants are still undocumented, and they could miss out on fundamental rights because of the new rules. Now, this is the main thing. It simply comes down to survival at this point. Why? Because they're actually talking about identification for food. So think about it like this. What if a Facebook account, this is a hypothetical, what if a Facebook account, now, a lot of people that I talk to are on Facebook, but some aren't. So, hypothetical situation. What if a Facebook account was necessary to log into the internet? And what if Facebook was owned by the government of, let's say, the United States? This was asked by Samandro Chapate in India, the research director at the Center for Internet Society. It's a think tank with offices in Bangalore and Delhi. It says they're actually building a system that will decide whether a child will eat or not on an afternoon based on the quality of internet connectivity and cleanliness of the child's thumbprint. So they're talking about this. In other words, in connection with a national ID, they're saying, think of it like this. What if what if it could get to the point where what if everybody had to be connected to Facebook, and without that you wouldn't have access to specific services? It's just a hypothetical situation. But now if you jump back to the Aadhaar card, they're saying the Aadhaar ID is being connected to digital communications via SIM card registration, tying into something similar to maybe a Facebook page on the web. You'd have to have connectivity, all this. What about the people that live out in the jungle? What about the people that travel miles to get food every day and go back to the jungle where they live? They don't have access to the internet. So some of this stuff is just crazy. You're denying people food because they won't take your national ID card. Some of these people can't spell their own name. But yet these people are so wound up in this, we've got to track and control everybody, that they're gearing everything they do towards forcing these people by keeping food from them, basic necessities, and forcing these national ID cards upon them. So it is being connected to financial transactions via bank accounts. They want to get all these Indians, and all Indian citizens are being forced to enroll for it against the threat of losing out on basic welfare services provided by the government in India. Bashan said the Aadhaar was now absolute mandatory. Early on, it was voluntary. Now it's absolute mandatory. You have to take it. It is absolutely necessary. You can't take the right to a benefit if you don't have the Aadhaar card. So they're saying, if you don't take the Aadhaar card, there goes your rights. One of the most contentious new rules introduced this month and coming into force in July requires children to show the Aadhaar cards to get free school meals. Many of those kids rely on those meals for their food that day. But yet they're saying you don't have this national ID card, there goes your free school meal. Compulsory identification could actually deter the school attendance if children struggle to get free school meals or uniforms. India's school meal program covers almost 100 million children. It's the largest in the world. Well over 1 billion people at this point. And they're cramming this national ID down their throat. Now that's one nation. That's just India. If you go to Uganda today, and this is a couple years old. You go to Uganda, no national ID, you're not allowed to have a job. Get this, no access to health care in Uganda today if you don't have it, you don't take the national ID card. No access to travel at all. No driver's license. You can't board a plane. You're stuck. That's in Uganda. So, we talk about the mark of the beast. The Bible says just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, everybody on earth is going to be given their own unique identification number. And without that number, you're not going to be able to function in society. Well, here we are, 2,000 years onward from that prophecy, and there is an ulterior motive to this. They're trying to establish a world governing body. And there are global efforts to establish a numbering system in the earth and give everybody on earth their own unique identification number. It doesn't matter if some of these people do live out in the jungle. Some of the poorest nations on earth, they're making these people come in out of the jungle, get your national ID card, or they're withholding food from these individuals. They're forcing them to take these. You say, well, why in the world are they doing this? Because it's all about control. At the end of the day, always remember this. The numbering of every individual on the planet, the only reason you number people is to control them, period. The reason Hitler numbered the Jews was so he could control them. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Israel several times, and there's a humongous section in there just on the numbering of individuals. If you came into a concentration camp, they would look at you, inspect you. If you got the number, then you went in and you had access to food and you were a worker. But if you didn't get the number, then obviously you went to the gas chambers and different things like that. You weren't able to function. Well, now in the near future, and the systems being set up already, these national ID systems being set up around the world are precursors to the mark of the beast. The Antichrist will eventually usurp authority over all of these national ID systems and use them to economically sanction individuals to bowing down to his edicts. The goal of the Antichrist, who will be propped up by Satan. The Bible says that in Revelation chapter 13 that Satan, the dragon, will give the Antichrist and his one world governing body his seat, power, and great authority. All of the authority of the Antichrist comes from Satan. Satan's goal from the very beginning has been to get humans to bow down to worship him instead of Christ. So the whole goal of the mark of the beast system is to get everybody on earth to bow down to the world governing body, the Antichrist, which will be Satan's minion here on earth. In doing so, you would be pledging allegiance to Satan himself. And so that's something that you absolutely can never do. Well, now you understand the reason behind all these national ID systems. You say, well, hold on a second, Dave. The national ID systems, that's simply, they're just trying to number people and it's all innocent. No. It's not innocent. That's why the United States has resisted a national ID for over 240 years now. Because our forefathers understood early on the only reason to number people is to control them. You make them reliant upon that number and then say, well, hey, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to take your number. Have you ever pulled up to a gas pump to get gas? Put your card in and it says, this card is rejected, invalid, not enough funds or whatever. You think, well, hold on a second. How does this gas pump know that I don't have enough funds? It's because there's a database already established somewhere with your name on it and your number. And if you don't have enough money in the funds or you've been hacked, they won't take your number. You can't get gas. So many of us have already felt the effects of economic sanctioning or being a part of this database system. So let's talk about, in the rest of the program, America's national ID. India's clear over on the other side of the world. So a lot of people, you might be sitting there thinking, man, that's India. What's that got to do with the United States of America? Well, it has a lot to do with the United States of America, because in the end, all of these national ID systems are going to be woven together. And it won't just be a nationalistic ID system. India has their own, Germany, Brazil, Israel. Israel has a national ID system today as well. It's not just going to be national. These are all going to be tied together internationally, and the Antichrist will eventually usurp control over that. And so that's why we don't really even want to be a part of the world. We absolutely don't want to be a part of the world government in the end time. And of course, I don't believe that we will. So that's why it's important that we understand America's national ID they're trying to implement here. So what I wanted to do throughout the rest of the program is I'm going to give you a real ID, America's effort at a national ID. I'm going to give you an update for 2017. Where are we at? Let's start off with the airport warning signs that are alarming many travelers. One of our IT guys that works here with us, his name's Dave Beard. He was traveling, 2 or 3 months ago. He sent Irvin and myself a picture of an airport warning sign that he saw. I believe it was in the Atlanta airport, that was talking about the real ID and giving some dates and saying, hey, after this date, if you don't have a real ID compliant license, you won't be able to fly on an airplane. You won't be able to board the airplane. So let's talk right now about those airport warning signs first. What am I doing? I'm giving you a real ID update, because it's America's move towards implementing a national ID here. America is one of the few holdouts right now that doesn't have a fully compulsory national ID. But they're trying in every way to implement it. It's implemented here in Texas. And so you say, well, hold on. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the airport warning signs first. They're alarming many travelers. Signs are popping up at many airports. Many of you may have seen them already, hanging on the walls, standing out in the middle of the aisle. And they're startling confused and dismayed travelers with the warning that a year from now, their driver's licenses or ID cards might be rejected. The signs declare that starting on January 22nd, 2018, it's actually less than a year now, if your card is produced by a state which is not compliant with the Real ID security standards, it's not going to be accepted for you to board a plane. You'll need to present an alternative acceptable form of identification if you intend to board the plane at that time. If you don't know which IDs are acceptable, you've got to visit TSA.gov. Those will tell you which forms of identity are acceptable at this point. The airport signs list 9 non-compliant states. So most states are already fully compliant right now. Of course, this list changes as states change their procedures, and it's got to be continually updated at this point. It is up to you as an individual traveler to determine what you must do to comply with federal travel regulations. Perhaps the presence of the warning signs will prompt travelers to urge their state leaders to move forward with complete compliance before waivers, extensions, and postponements are exhausted. So it's very important you look into what's going on, because in 2018, January, there will be individuals that won't get a fly because their real estate or their real ID, their state's not Real ID compliant. So let's talk about Real ID compliance extended again. When the Real ID Act was signed into law in 2005, now think about this, this is 17. So it was signed into law by George W. Bush in 2005. Who could have imagined that the driver's license security legislation would not be fully implemented all the way until 2020? 15 years, that's 15 years later. Yet here we are today, 12 years after the Real ID was passed by Congress, and the law continues to generate contention and controversy and confusion, really, to many people. They don't really understand it. Also, the federal government's shifting position on the enforcement of the deadlines, it's been postponed. People have fought against it. It's been postponed and postponed. They haven't fully implemented because states were bucking against it. So the government shifting position on the enforcement of deadlines, it's actually created an unnecessary level of bewilderment among the states, the government, and people wondering really what's going on. By the way, if the Department of Homeland Security has already determined that your state is compliant, you'll have until all the way to October 1st, 2020 to upgrade your card to Real ID standards. But of course, that may change again because they've postponed it so many times now, it's hard to really drill down. But up until this point, up until the last few months, we haven't seen these signs in the airports cropping up saying that, hey, in 2018, you've got to have a Real ID compliant license or you're not going to be able to board the plane. So it's very important that we understand that we're getting farther and farther off into it. The implementation of a national ID in the United States of America. And if you remember, look at how in the Aadhaar situation in India, they're now forcing them people to have that or they don't get basic welfare subsidies from the government. Some of them depend on that food for their very living. Look how far it can go.
From Here to Armageddon, a new exciting 8-lesson series to share with your friends and family. Order yours right away.
Answering many questions like how far are we from the Battle of Armageddon? What will happen between now and then? Where are we on the timeline? Your questions answered in this exciting 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon.
Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-END-TIME, 1-800-363-8463. Order yours right away.
Today I have some exciting news to share with you. You can now become a magazine subscriber for life. You will receive first-class benefits that will include a lifetime membership to End Time Magazine, as well as an unlimited access to the digital version of the magazine. You will also receive 20% off of all future orders at endtime.com, well, at least till the rapture happens. Never worry about missing one important issue or forgetting to renew. You can rest assured when something happens in the news pertaining to Bible prophecy, you will be informed with the most recent cutting-edge material available. End Time Magazine has been the forefront of End Time Ministries since the beginning, and we would love to join with you in this first ever opportunity of becoming a magazine subscriber for life. Join today by calling 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or go to endtime.com.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
So we're talking about national IDs being implemented around the world, and it's a precursor to the system of the mark of the beast, Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18, which eventually the Antichrist will usurp authority over that system and cause everybody on earth, those who are not resisting him, to bow down to his edicts, do exactly what he says. He wants to enforce his control on the earth. But by pledging allegiance to him, the Bible calls it a form of worship. And that's something you can never do because he's going to be a totally godless entity. The Antichrist is going to be propped up by Satan. So you absolutely cannot pledge allegiance to the Antichrist or his world governing system. You cannot do that. The Bible, it's going to be eternal damnation for those that do. And so as we get farther off into this system, we're going to stay on top of it, and we're going to try to help you. We'll be figuring out, what do we do? How are we going to live? This, that, and the other. We'll have to look at it and see what happens. So we'll stay on top of it. At this point, we've had people call us for years and say, hey, what are we going to do during that time? If we don't take the mark of the beast, what's going to happen? The fact of the matter is, number one, the Bible, there's a spiritual aspect to it. Number one, the Bible says, take no thought what ye shall eat, drink, or wear. Your heavenly Father knows ye have need of these things. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. There will come a time, which you really need to be doing that now, but there's going to come a time during the mark of the beast where you're going to have to depend upon God, number one, a spiritual aspect. Number two, there will be ways to survive. The Bible says that the righteous has never been seen begging bread. And so the fact of the matter is, God's not going to leave us without nothing. And so consequently, we'll look into it at that time to see what we need to do. But at this time right now, the main things I can never do, two things. I can't ever take a mark of identification on my person, whether it's a chip in your hand, an invisible tattoo, anything. No mark of identification on my body. And number two, never pledge allegiance to the Antichrist or his world governing system. Those are two things you absolutely cannot do. That would be receiving the mark of the beast. And the Bible says everybody who does that will spend eternity in the lake of fire. You can't do that. It's eternal damnation to pledge allegiance to this individual and his governing system who's propped up by Satan. So you absolutely cannot do that. Now, from a secular standpoint, I've had people, that call in and say, what in the world? You guys, this is crazy. You guys this doesn't make any sense. This is the Bible. This is not something we made up out of thin air that we got from a comic book. We're talking about Scripture. This is going to happen. Just like all of the other prophecies have happened up to this time, the mark of the beast system is going to happen. And that's what I'm talking about today on the radio. The national ID system being implemented around the world. Now they're trying to implement the one they have for several years now, even all the way back to Ronald Reagan. They've tried to implement a national ID system here in the United States. And the real ID is the next step in that. It's what they're trying to do right now. We're talking about real ID compliance right now. You say, well, what about my state? As of December 2016, when the TSA began posting the airport signs that we've talked about, there were only 24 states and Washington, D.C., which produced licenses compliant with the Real ID standards. Most remaining states have an extension through October 10th of this year. If you are unsure about what to do about the Real ID Act in your state, you can check online for the status of your state at Homeland Security, the current status of states and territories. Now, preventing terrorism or controlling Americans. Let's talk about that, because they're saying, hey, because of all of the refugees and the immigrants, everybody coming into the United States, we've got to number everybody. We've got to have this Real ID Act implemented. Or is that really what's going on? Or are they just trying to control Americans? Look at what's happening in these national IDs around the world. You can look at them. You go there without the national ID, you do not function in society, period. I've got a friend of mine who's a missionary in Chile, and they're under a fully functioning national ID card. And he said without that national ID card, you can't function in society there. No job, no anything, no license, no zero without that national ID card. So it starts off, voluntary, hey, get this card, it all sounds good, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of time, it's enforcement, it's control. So let's talk about it in America. Critics claim that the Real ID Act coerces state governments into turning driver's licenses and state ID cards into heavy-handed tools of Department of the Homeland Security. Citizens of non-compliant states are threatened with the loss of such privileges as being allowed to board airplanes or enter federal buildings. Opponents of the Real ID have referred to the bill as an internal passport. That is, a special form of identification and control for even domestic flights, domestic travel. The creator of the Real ID Act was Representative James Sensenbrenner. He asserted that Real ID is all about solving illegal immigration and preventing terrorists from entering the country. However, Ron Paul was totally against this, still is. When that happened, he countered that Real ID is all about tracking and controlling Americans. And I'm here to tell you that's exactly what it's about. It's starting out about, immigration and let's control terrorism. But I'm telling you, at the end of the day, once the big database is established, it'll come down to control before it's over with. It's what all the national ID systems have done. Do you think that's not what's going to happen here in America once it's implemented? For Americans to be tracked and controlled, someone must first verify that they are indeed Americans. And that is why the state departments of motor vehicles have added, they will have added duties at that point. The DMVs are to verify citizenships. Detractors of the Real ID emphasize that the law turns state motor vehicle department workers into federal immigration officials. You see, the Real ID gives the DMV worker the added responsibility of verifying the citizenship of all those who apply for a Real ID compliant driver's license or identification cards. Another controversy is the way the law requires states to share their databases of driver's information across the national data network. That's one of the keys right there, is this big data network that they're going to have nationally. Everybody will have access to. Look, do your research on all the other nations on earth. That's what the national IDs have done. Now they're trying to do it here in the United States. This is the same kind of database which would be essential for the creation of the National Identification System. The Real ID is a Real ID database. So, does the Real ID create a national ID database? Absolutely. In response to the claims that Real ID creates such a national database, the Department of Homeland Security says on its website, now get this, Real ID does not build a national database, nor does it grant the federal government or another state access to states' driver's license data. Now, remember that statement. However, the Identity Project has testified that one of the goals of the Real ID Act is a distributed national ID database in which a single query routed through the American Association of Motor Vehicles Administrators data hub can retrieve driver information from every state ID database. It's going to be a shared database all across the nation, regardless of what the Department of Homeland Security says. The Cato Institute assures us that there is absolutely a national database system equivalent to a single centralized database, and it is required by the Real ID law. What's all this about? Control, control, control. Technically, it explains the website, the Cato website, the database is not actually federal because it's operated by the states and the AAMVA or AMVA at the federal government's behest, but it's still a national ID database. However, it would be quite a stretch to try to explain how the Real ID database is not a national ID database, which is what they've tried to do for several reasons. First, it is national in that it is used throughout the country. So it's national, number one. Next, it is legally required with no provision for opting out. So it's mandatory. And finally, it is used for identification. So look at it this way. If it works like a national ID, it sounds like a national ID, and it looks like a national ID, then it's a national ID. If it's national, if it's a database, and if it's mandatory, it's a national ID, folks. Also, all data printed on the Real ID compliant licenses and ID cards is nationally standardized, and all cards can be scanned using the same readers and software. So you see how far we're getting off into this. It is a national ID, and it's all about control. It's not about immigration and terrorism. That's the crisis that they're using to implement a national ID here in the United States. Up to this point, for over 240 years, we've resisted any kind of a national ID here in the United States. But now they're trying to implement the Real ID Act, and that's something that we have opposed ever since it was signed by George W. Bush in 2005. As a result, many of the states have opposed it. Many of them passed laws against it. As a result, they've postponed it several times because the states just basically said, no, we're not going to do that. They've resisted, so without the states complying, the government had to keep postponing it. So let's talk about the Real ID Data Hub that challenges the Fourth Amendment. The National Real ID Act, the hub software and central database, has been developed by the American Association of Motor Vehicles Administrators, or AMVA, A-A-M-V-A. AMVA avoids much public scrutiny because it is not a federal agency. It is a private, nonprofit trade association which is not subject to public record laws. The Fourth Amendment requires the government to allow Americans to secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against reasonable searches and seizures. In other words, because of the Constitution, Americans have an expectation about their right to control what others see of their private information. Because the Real ID Data Hub compromises this constitutional right, it has inflamed an ongoing and intense opposition. So, opposition obviously as a result continues. Real ID legislation has met with staunch resistance over the years from many states, some going so far as to pass laws against compliance. At one point, 16 states had passed anti-Real ID legislation. In other words, it would have been against the law for someone in those states to use state funds to help comply with Real ID. All the way back in May of 2007, Epic.org announced that 43 groups had joined the campaign to stop Real ID, and the opposition has continued to this day. So it's very important that we understand they're trying to implement a national ID here in the United States. It's one of the very, very few nations on earth that doesn't already have a fully compulsory national ID.
Let me tell you today about our exciting Armageddon collection. What does the term Armageddon mean? Why is it so important in Bible prophecy in the last days? And what will happen between now and then? In our Armageddon collection, we cover subjects such as events of the final 7 years, the revealing of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and the world's greatest revival just ahead. In this special collection, you will receive the DVD, Seeds of Armageddon, November 29, 2012, our 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon, along with a printout of our 7-year timeline, and our informative DVD, First Step to Armageddon, December 23rd, 2016. All of this for your gift of $140 or more, plus the cost of shipping and handling. To order your Armageddon collection, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
So we talked about the Real ID Act being implemented here in the United States. It's one of the few nations on earth that does not already have a fully compulsory national ID system. And make no mistake about it, all of these will be combined before it's all over with, if they haven't already. So those people who believe in a world governing body, liberal internationalists, they all have tried. There are many of them here in the United States that are trying to implement this socialist controlling system of a national ID here in the United States. They have been for years now. So the question is, the mark of the beast prophecy was written 2,000 years ago, Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18. All of the prophecies are converging that are supposed to occur just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. So the question is, in the United States, is the real ID the beginning of the mark of the beast? Of course, Revelation 13 warns about a false Messiah, the Antichrist, who will be given power over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. It's Revelation 13:7. The Bible also describes the false prophet who causes all to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Without the mark or the name of the beast, the Antichrist, or the number of his name, no one will be able to buy or sell. Of course, it's found, you got to read it, Revelation 13, 16 through 17. In practical terms, under Real ID, Americans must have a government number to hold jobs and have bank accounts, or, in other words, to be able to function in society, period. The Mark of the Beast prophecy makes one aspect of the information demand by the Real ID Act particularly alarming to Bible students. Real ID requires biometric identification, which includes your fingerprints and eye scans. The Mark of the Beast prophecy states that the mark will be in the hand or the forehead, and it's Revelation 14:9. Or Revelation 14:9, and that's Revelation 13, 16 through 18. Sorry about that. Our fingerprints are in our hands and our foreheads, and our eyes are in our foreheads. So if you think about it, 2,000 years ago, this is how in detail these prophecies are. John said, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there's going to be a world government established. There will eventually be the Antichrist, or a political figure who will usurp authority over that world government. There's going to be a world religion established, and the Antichrist will use a numbering system. Everybody on earth is going to be given their own unique identification number. And without that number, they're not going to be able to buy or sell. John was prophesying for the time just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now think about it. For 2,000 years, that was never possible until the invention of the internet and the computer. A numbering system worldwide was never possible. But now it's very possible. And the world government has been established. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, the World Court, the International Criminal Court, all of those are world governing entities. And they are in many ways controlling the world already. And they can control the economics, the trade, the management aspects of many countries. And through the Sustainable Development Goals, they're controlling the production, consumption of most nations on earth already, and they're all about wealth redistribution from developed countries to underdeveloped countries. So it's very important that we understand all of these prophecies are converging at the same time. The world religion. And now we see efforts to number every individual on earth through national ID systems. The Real ID here in the United States requires that the information in each state's database be linked with the database of other states. Once your information is placed in the federalized database, the federal government can then instantly access your personal information. Real ID would condense all that information into an easily assessed database for the first time. Without your compliant identification card, you won't be able to board a plane, open a bank account, or access any service that depends on federally approved identification. Think about it like this. They're all arguing the Obamacare health care bill now, trying to make it into Ryan Care or whatever they end up with. But that's all going to be based on identification. If all this stuff is implemented here in the United States, if it finally gets implemented, there will come a time when you'll have, for any government subsidized entity or benefit, you'll have to have your national ID to have access to that. Well, imagine if in the future, this is hypothetical, if all health care was controlled by the government, or all access to a job or anything like that was controlled by the government, and you had to have your national ID card to get a job, to get health care, for your kids to go to school, for you to travel. And then they said, no, without that national ID card, you don't have access to any of that. You say, well, oh, Dave, come on. We could never get there. Listen, that's what I'm trying to tell you. That's why I brought up the Aadhaar Card Act in the beginning in India. And I brought up Uganda, and I could talk about many nations around the world. They're already there. They started with it being voluntary. Anybody who wants to, come and get your national ID card, blah, blah, blah. But now, it's absolutely mandatory. And they're cutting off food subsidies to people that, get this, without a child in India having a national ID card, they're fixing to cut off his government-subsidized free lunch. Some of them kids, that's the only food they get. And yet these people who are over this government are saying, if you don't have a national ID card, we're going to cut that food subsidy off to that child. I'm talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. So if you think this is not about control, think again. This might start at now jump from there to the Real ID Act. You say, well, this is harmless, turning this into a national ID card. It absolutely is not harmless. Why do you number a people? Always remember this. Remember the Jews in the Holocaust being numbered by Hitler. The only reason he took time to tattoo those individuals was to control them. It wasn't because the tattoos were fashionable. That's not why they'd done that. Like I said, I've been to the Holocaust, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. It's all about control, control, control. Go there and read the stories. Without the number, those Jews they were not allowed, they got no food whatsoever. You had to show your number. You had to be a worker. If you were able to work, you could eat. No number, no food. No number, no housing. You got nothing if you didn't have the number. That's what it was all about. It was about control. And so at the end of the day, all of these national IDs around the world, compulsory, in other words, mandatory IDs, it's all about control. Now they're trying to bring it here to the United States. The Real ID Act is a national ID. You say, oh, that won't affect me today. It's not going to affect you today, but if it's fully implemented, they will be controlling you. In other words, the government will be able to tell you whether you can board a plane or not. The government will be able to tell you whether you can enter any kind of a federal building. The government eventually will be able to tell you whether you can open a bank account, whether you could have a job. That's where it's all headed. So they're saying, oh, no, it's not a national ID. You go to the Department of Homeland Security's website. It's not a national ID. I'm telling you, that's exactly what it is. It's national, and it's an ID system. It's a national ID, and it's all about control. That's why these signs that are cropping up in the airports are kind of flipping everybody out, because they're saying, whoa, now hold on a second. What's this Real ID? If I don't have this Real ID, I'm not going to be able to board a plane. Where'd that come from? It was signed into law by George W. Bush clear back in 2005. So the fact of the matter is, we will be controlled. If this is fully implemented, we will be controlled by a tragically flawed central authority. It's very simple. And you say, well, and basically what's going to happen is the state sovereignty is going to be attacked by this flawed system. The significance of the Real ID extends beyond disputes over unfunded mandates and search and seizures. Real ID is a direct assault on state sovereignty. It usurps the authority of the states to institute their own driver's license regulations because the law creates a centralized registry of personal data. It also increases the potential for fraud and identity theft. Imagine if we had a national database of everybody's numbers, all of their digital footprints and everything, and somebody hacked into that mess. Imagine that. Imagine how much havoc could be wreaked here in the United States. You say, well, these databases are very secure. Show me a database on the planet that's 100% secure. Is there one? I don't know the answer. I don't think so. There's been some awful high-level things that have been getting hacked lately. So the Department of Homeland Security has been issuing waivers to states which promise to work on compliance. This illustrates a flaw in the system. The federal government has passed a law intended to prevent another 9/11 style attack. But it has allowed states to seek waivers for over a decade now. If the law is essential for national security, which is what that's one of their big crises that they're using to implement this thing, it should be enforced immediately, right? If they're trying to prevent another 9/11, we need to do this tomorrow. But they've said, well, if the states don't want to comply, let's just keep postponing it. If it is not crucial for our protection, then it should be repealed. It shouldn't be a law on the books. So it's very, very important that we understand. Let me summarize for you what we're talking about today, because I want to make sure you get this, because we're all facing this over the next year or two. Many of you may have already seen real ID enforcement signs in the airports cropping up. I got people sending me pictures of them all over the place. Dave, Irvin, what is this all about? Well, I can tell you what it's all about. Do your research. The Real ID Act, signed into law in 2005 by George W. Bush, is an effort here in the United States to implement a national ID system, just like they're doing in most nations already on the earth. And it's their effort. The United States has been one of the great holdouts for over 240 years now. They tried it back with Reagan. They've tried it several times now. And this is their effort right now. And many states are already in full compliant to the Real ID. You can go online and find out if your state is compliant already. But we've resisted it now for 12 years. And we're still going to resist it because we don't want it to be implemented here in the United States. But I wanted to let you know that we're in the end time. This is just one of the ongoing fulfillments of prophecy that let us know we are in the end time, and we've got to stay on top of this because we don't want to comply to this before it's over with.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.